Tonight on Capitol Journal, the Joint Legislative Transportation Committee meets to discuss the state's road and bridge progress amid rising inflation. We'll take you there. The Mobile Bayway Bridge project has been revived. State Senator Chris Elliott joins us in studio to go over the details. With school starting back up soon, Randy Scott reports on the state's efforts to get more teachers in the classroom. Karen Goldsmith reports on work being done to get those in mental health crisis care and keep them out of prison. Robin Stone of the Business Councill of Alabama discusses the big governmental affairs conference this weekend and a new healthcare initiative. Kristin Sharp and Steve Benjamin of the new Flex Trade Association talk about the future of the gig economy here in Alabama. It's all next on Capitol Journal. From our State House studio in Montgomery, I'm Todd Stacy. Welcome to Capitol Journal. The Commerce Department announced this week that the nation's economy shrank by 0.9% last quarter. That's the second straight quarter of negative growth, meeting the technical definition of a recession. The report comes as consumers and businesses have been struggling under the weight of high inflation, gas prices, and loan costs. Here in Alabama, business leaders have a negative outlook on the economy for the first time in 8 years. That's according to a quarterly poll of more than 200 executives. The Alabama Business Confidence Index stands at 47.3%, down more than 7 points from the last quarter and continuing a downward trend from 67% a year ago. The quarterly survey is conducted by the University of Alabama Center for Business and Economic Research. This was the first negative index since 2013. The Alabama Legislature's Joint Transportation Committee met this week to review the state's road and bridge construction plans. The big item on the agenda was the revival of the Mobile Bayway Bridge project, once declared dead after local opposition to high tolls. A revised plan was adopted unanimously by the Mobile and Eastern Shore Metropolitan Planning Organizations. That's the first of many steps to seeing the bridge constructed. Here's how the project breaks down. The estimated total cost of the project is $2.7 billion. That will be paid for by $250 million in state funds, $1.1 billion in bonds, $1.1 billion in federal loans, both of which would be paid back with toll revenue. That leaves about another $500 million officials are hoping will come from a grant from the Infrastructure and Jobs Act passed by Congress last year. As for tolls, the plan calls for a $2.50 toll for passenger vehicles and $18 for trucks. There are also discounts for local commuters. None of the existing tunnels and bridges would be tolled under this plan. Ed Austin of the Department of Transportation discussed the process.
Both MPOs this morning, the Eastern Shore and the Mobile MPO, unanimously voted to add the Mobile River Bridge and Bayway project back to their long-range transportation plans and transportation improvement plan. We will receive that information from both MPOs shortly. ALDOT will then request that that be added to the statewide transportation improvement plan, and from there we are ready to start moving forward with advancing this project. We will start having some industry forums next month to start talking to industry representatives about advancing this project, getting feedback from them on some things. We're looking to advance this as a design-build process, probably a progressive design-build. And so we will have industry discussions and then do a request for proposals, and request for qualifications will be released. So we start receiving official requests back from, or solicitations of interest back from eligible firms, and then we'll go through a process of shortlisting those and then going on from there to ultimately identify a team that will likely be who we move forward with.
Senator Chris Elliott had been opposed to the 2019 bridge plan that had tolls as high as $6 and implemented tolls on existing roadways. He supports this new plan and calls it a must-do project for the state.
We are fast reaching the point of gridlock on a daily basis, especially in the summertime. Baldwin County in particular is the fastest growing county in the states, and it's the third fastest growing, it contains the third fastest growing metropolitan statistical area in the country. Almost half of all of Alabama's population growth came from one county, Baldwin, since the 2020 census. It's exponential growth. And we're going to have to continue to invest in the infrastructure in this region if we're going to continue to see the tax revenue, the dividends, if you will, that are paid out of the area. You have incredible investment in the Port of Mobile at the Alabama state docks that makes Alabama businesses more competitive statewide, whether that's poultry production, automobile production, airplane and aerospace production, all of which comes through the Port of Mobile, and a lot of which gets transported by truck in and out of the port. You see warehousing and distribution on both sides of the bay, from Amazon investment, Walmart investments, grocery store investments, major distribution warehouses from Aldi and others. As those continue to come to the area, the transportation problems, if you will, are going to start to constrain our economic development that is happening, and that's where you have a failure. So this is a must-do. This is something we absolutely have to figure out a way to accomplish.
My full interview with Senator Elliott later in the show. A new report shows Alabama's third grade students have made a slight improvement in reading. The percentage of students not reading on grade level was 22%, according to the most recent state testing. That's 1 point down from 23% last year. The slight improvement comes amid implementation of the Alabama Literacy Act, which requires that struggling readers in kindergarten through third grade be given extra classroom instruction, progress monitoring, and read-at-home plans. The law also increased funding for reading initiatives, including summer programs. Well, it will soon be time to go back to school, and administrators are busy making preparations. The state is working with local districts to fill teacher positions in time for classes to begin. Capital Journal's Randy Scott reports.
Adjustments to state teacher certification scoring are designed to help Alabama with a teacher shortage problem.
Maybe their whole life they've had issues with standardized tests, and this will give them an opportunity to get into the classroom and demonstrate they can do the work.
State Superintendent Dr. Eric Mackey says in order to improve schools and student performance, getting more new teachers in classrooms is a priority school officials are tackling.
We have a few hundred teachers who will qualify, who have passed their coursework, have the higher GPA, they're ready to teach, they want to teach, but again, they have a lot of issues with standardized tests.
Dr. Mackey adds addressing teacher certification scores is just the beginning.
We don't want anybody in the classroom who's not a strong teacher, and so if people get in there and they can't do the work, well, that's why we rely on a principal to say, hey, this didn't work out for you, but we already do that.
This process is already underway.
So this was immediate, and we already have had teachers calling, or potential teachers calling and wanting to know if they can apply for this certificate. Now this is an initial certification pathway.
Other ideas include getting new generations of instructors in Alabama classrooms.
This is for college students who are going through the program who want to become teachers. But we do have some folks out there who've graduated college, who did complete all the coursework, they did their student teaching, they're ready to be teachers, but they never made that praxis score.
For Capital Journal, I'm Randy Scott.
The Alabama Department of Mental Health is one of several state agencies invested in finding solutions to keep people out of prison. Commissioner Kim Boswell has discussed the importance of early intervention. Capital Journal's Karen Goldsmith reports.
Helping ex-inmates adjust to life after prison is the work of Alabama's Reentry Commission. In her presentation to the group last week, the state's mental health commissioner, Kimberly Boswell, shared,
we know that kids who are in a pre-K classroom are 3.5 times more likely to be expelled or suspended than K through 12 combined. Those same kids are 10 times more likely to have negative school experiences and 8 times more likely to be incarcerated later in life. So we really do know at age 4 the kids who are eventually going to struggle.
Boswell admits she was alarmed by these statistics, so she followed up with Dr. Barbara Cooper, who heads Alabama's Department of Early Childhood Education.
Because the question is, why are kids getting kicked out of pre-K? And 9 times out of 10, that is because of some behavior that they're seeing in the classroom. And of course, pre-K classrooms are not mandated. Kids don't have to go to pre-K. So oftentimes when they're in that classroom situation and there's some behaviors going on, then the natural thing is just to simply kick them out of pre-K.
She adds 30% of mental health needs of middle and high school kids start as early as age 4, so early interventions had to be made, and both agencies work collaboratively to provide pre-K classrooms with mental health consultants.
So in Alabama, if a kid is in a first-class pre-K classroom, they cannot be kicked out or suspended without first going through a screening and assessment to determine whether those behaviors are a classroom discipline issue or whether those are behaviors that are related to trauma or a mental health issue that that child is having.
This initiative impacts 21,000 pre-K students.
Over the last 5 years, Alabama has done a tremendous job in funding first-class pre-K and being sure that we identify the kids in those first-class pre-K programs who have the potential to have issues later on.
For Capital Journal, I'm Karen Goldsmith.
News from Washington this week. Congress has given final passage to legislation aimed at boosting semiconductor production so that more chips and other components are made here in the United States rather than China or Taiwan. The bill totals $280 million in federal spending, much of which will be used to offer incentives and tax credits for tech companies. Within Alabama's congressional delegation, Democratic Congresswoman Terry Sewell was the lone vote in favor of the package. She said it was important for national security. Republican Congressmen Jerry Carl, Barry Moore, Mike Rogers, Robert Aderholt, Mo Brooks, and Gary Palmer all opposed the bill, some arguing that it spent too much and had too little accountability. Senators Richard Shelby and Tommy Tuberville also voted against the bill earlier this week. And that's the news. We'll be right back with tonight's guests.
You can watch past episodes of Capital Journal online at video.aptv.org. Capital Journal episodes are also available on APTV's free mobile app. You can also connect with Capital Journal and link to past episodes on Capital Journal's Facebook page. And you can listen to past episodes of Capital Journal when you're driving or on the go with Capital Journal podcasts.
Next, I'm joined by State Senator Chris Elliott from Baldwin County. Senator, thanks for coming on Capital Journal.
Thanks for having me.
I know you're in town for the Joint Transportation Committee meeting that was happening this week. What can you tell us about what went on?
Well, the Joint Transportation Committee was really revamped and given some additional authorities prior to the passage of the Rebuild Alabama Act, really so the legislature could keep a closer eye on what was happening with gas tax revenues in the state. And today we looked at a host of different issues, from railroad issues to an update on the I-10 bridge, along with some other issues that include the annual update of ALDOT's financing and where specifically that money is going, in addition to the federal funding that's coming in.
Mm-hmm. Well, and we'll get to the I-10 bridge in a minute, but I wanted to ask about inflation because we've seen not only supply chain issues, but inflation is just killing everybody in terms of raising the prices just for goods and services. But I've got to imagine for road and bridge materials, it's even worse. So how is that impacting what the state's doing transportation-wise?
Well, families are seeing inflation hit their pocketbook when they go to the grocery store or buy fuel or anything else. Businesses are seeing the same thing. Well, government's no exception to that. Government buys things just as everybody else does. So the cost of government doing business is rising along with everything else. And that is, of course, impacting the cost of projects as they're let. And we're seeing that in project after project, from a simple traffic light installation in the town of Loxley to major highway infrastructure projects like the I-10 bridge, where inflation continues to be a main driver of cost increases over previous estimates.
And the gas price situation also impacts us, because the way we do gas taxes is per gallon, not the total price, right? So just because you're spending more money at the pump, if people are buying fewer gallons of gas, that means less revenue.
That's correct. Those curves, they differ from each other, and you see that as demand for fuel goes down because the price goes up, the amount of revenue from gas taxes goes down as well, even though the cost of repaving or new construction goes up as well. So it's really a nasty situation, frankly, that I think the Biden administration's gotten us into, and one that we need to reverse as quickly as possible.
Let's talk about the bridge. There was big news this week as the authorities, the municipal authorities there in Eastern Shore and Mobile voted to once again place the Mobile Bayway project, bridge project, on their list, if you will, for the federal money. It's a big deal because these are the two organizations that, or at least the Eastern Shore one, rejected the proposal back in 2019. What's different about this? What's your reaction to the local support for the new project?
So folks will remember I was a big proponent of the project initially, and then as the details of the original proposal came out, became a very big opponent of the project. The project as it stands now it certainly deserves to get the Most Improved Award. It has come the furthest from what was initially put out there by ALDOT. The details and the differences are pretty significant. Initially, it was a public-private partnership with foreign ownership, which was very concerning to folks. It had a huge toll of $6 that was proposed, a nondescript or didn't really come to fruition until very end of $90 of a monthly pass. These things that were just really pretty hard to swallow. Agreements with the P3 to keep any other additional construction from happening in the near future. You saw tolling of existing infrastructure in the Wallace Tunnel initially. So we've moved away from all of those things now. You now have the bridge being owned and operated by the state, which is a good way to go. A toll for Algo pass holders, those are the electronic toll pass holders, of $2.50, which for a monthly commuter, a daily commuter, results in less than $1 a trip, which is pretty significant. And then you have significant discounts for those that simply hold the pass down to $2.50. So you're really putting the burden of the cost of this infrastructure on the interstate traffic that is going between states, our visitors from Florida and Texas and Louisiana and Mississippi, who end up paying the lion's share of this, which I think is exactly how it should be. And I think that the MPOs deserve a lot of credit for working through this, figuring out where the sticking points were with the public, working with ALDOT, and ALDOT did a good job working with the locals this time to come up with a solution that was palatable. I don't think everybody got what they wanted or everything they wanted, but I think we're in a spot where the MPOs felt comfortable, and as a former chairman of an MPO, felt comfortable putting this back on the State Transportation Improvement Plan, the STIP, so that it could move forward.
I do remember that opposition, and especially like you said, the toll itself, $6.50, just it's a lot of money, but also the tolling of the existing Wallace Tunnel and Bankhead Tunnel. That is hard to swallow, because okay, these are existing roadways, no tolls there, and suddenly we're going to toll them because I guess the justification was we want to stop people from avoiding the bridge toll and going. That kind of didn't make a whole lot of sense.
It really didn't, and it was one of those things that was driven by the public-private partnership nature, right? The private entities were so concerned about toll avoidance that they put those types of caveats in the agreement
because they want the toll.
And I think with moving this out of the P3 realm and back to state ownership, the state is able to have more confidence in mitigating that risk themselves in how they design the structure and work through it. And I think that removing that risk or that risk aversion from the private sector really probably decreases the total cost from a toll standpoint of the project.
Well, let's talk about how it gets paid for. We've got about a $2.7 billion price tag. That's a pretty big price tag. So I saw in the press release it said $250 million from the state, a $125 million infra grant from the federal government. I assume there might be more federal money, sort of counting on some more federal money. Where else is this money going to come from?
So we call this the capital stack, right? This is the different pieces of financing that you use to fund a $2.7 billion project, which is the largest ALDOT project in history. So you're seeing a mix of the infra grant at 125, ALDOT's committing $250 million up front. Layered in there is a dependency on a $500 million mega grant. So this is coming from the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, the federal act, that provides a very few of these grants nationwide. So that's going to be highly sought after and competitive. But if this project isn't a candidate for it, I don't know what is. That's really the big sticking point in question for me, is whether or not we make that happen. The balance is made up of bond issuances, one through TIFIA, which is a FHWA, a Federal Highway Administration, and USDOT grant that would be repaid with the toll revenue, most of which will come from out of state. And then the balance is just a straight up bond issuance, likely bonded by the state toll authority itself, that is in the neighborhood of $1 billion, that would be paid back with toll revenue as well.
So a lot of upfront money, and then the tolls pay it back. Let me also ask you about, while we're there with the federal government and especially the Infrastructure and Jobs Act, that there's always politics when it comes to road money. We happen to have two senators that voted against that, and House members that voted against that. I guess the one, Terry Sewell, voted for it. So are we worried that might discourage the federal government from including us in that mega grant?
Yes. I mean, in a word, yes. I mean, listen, it's Alabama, and a very red state, a governor that's critical of the Biden administration on a regular basis.
Right.
Statewide elected officials that are critical of the administration, obviously, yes. The good news is that from a federal level, this artery is incredibly important, not just for Alabama, but for the entire coastal region, Gulf Coast region. And I think that the professionals at USDOT and Federal Highway realize that. They were there when President Trump was there. I've met back with Obama officials, when they were there before President Trump. So the politics at the national level certainly swing back and forth. But hopefully those folks within the inner workings of USDOT and FHWA understand the importance of this, know that it is been on and off again, and that if we do not strike when the iron's hot, if you will, that the likelihood of this moving forward is could be slim. So we'll see how that moves out. And then if it doesn't work out, then we've got a $500 million hole that we're going to have to fill some way in order to get this problem solved.
Would you consider this just a must-do project? Like, find a way to get it done? That's kind of the message I get from Sandy Stimpson and a lot from down there on the coast. This has to happen one way or the other.
We are fast reaching the point of gridlock on a daily basis, especially in the summertime. Baldwin County in particular is the fastest growing county in the states, and it's the third fastest growing. It contains the third fastest growing metropolitan statistical area in the country. Almost half of all of Alabama's population growth came from one county, Baldwin, since the 2020 census. It's exponential growth, and we're going to have to continue to invest in the infrastructure in this region if we're going to continue to see the tax revenue, the dividends, if you will, that are paid out of the area. You have incredible investment in the port of Mobile at the Alabama state docks that makes Alabama businesses more competitive statewide, whether that's poultry production, automobile production, airplane and aerospace production, all of which comes through the port of Mobile, and a lot of which gets transported by truck in and out of the port. You see warehousing and distribution on both sides of the bay, from Amazon investment, Walmart investments, grocery store investments, major distribution warehouses from Aldi and others. As those continue to come to the area, the transportation problems, if you will, are going to start to constrain our economic development that is happening, and that's where you have a failure. So this is a must-do. This is something we absolutely have to figure out a way to accomplish. And I think whether this is the plan that moves forward or not, the recent cooperation between the MPOs and the State Department of Transportation, and the realization that those have got to work together in order to find a solution that's palatable for both, is to be lauded.
Let's switch to politics for a minute. We've just come out of this primary election, kind of an exhausting primary election after you get through all of it, all of the challenges and everything. There's been some talk about changing our process to a closed primary, where I talked to Republican Party Chairman Wall about this, where only registered Republicans would vote in the Republican primary, only registered Democrats could vote in the Democratic primary. Let's talk about that kind of out of the primary. Do you expect to see a proposal, because this would take legislation to actually do you expect to see that discussed in the next legislative session?
I do, and it's something that's been discussed before, ironically, legislation that was sponsored by my colleague Senator Tom Wiley previously.
Oh, really?
So you have to look at some fundamental questions, I think, to arrive at a conclusion. One, a party primary is a party function. You're picking the party's nominee, and whether or not that's a party function. And I think the answer to both of those is yes. And then whether or not you want to allow members of another party to influence the decision of who the party's nominee is. And I think when you talk to most Republicans, the answer to that would be no. I think what you've seen in a number of races this year, and specifically in the Senate race in East Alabama, you saw probably the best documented case of organized Democrats voting against a Republican incumbent for the purposes of swaying the outcome of the primary, and not only documenting the plans to do so, but then documenting that they had done so
in the New York Times,
on social media in the New York Times, and then claiming, I was the one that made sure that this changed. And I think that the Republican Party, and as a member of the steering committee, we've got to look at whether or not that type of action, that clear involvement of the other party's activists playing and affecting the outcome of a party function, is something we're going to continue to allow.
Alabama does have just a considerable number of independent voters, right, that don't necessarily want to register as a Republican. They may not consider themselves liberal or Democrat, but they could be libertarian. They could be, hey, I'm a conservative, but I don't want to sign my name to a Republican, registration of any kind. How do you deal with that, and in kind of limiting the universe of voters?
So I think you've probably stumbled on the compromise position, and that is to potentially allow Republican independents maybe to vote in a Republican primary, but to bar folks that are clearly members of the other party, to bar Democrats from voting in a Republican primary. And I think that that may be where we end up, because there is some trepidation when it comes to simply saying only Republicans, nobody else. And to your point, there are a lot of folks out there that I think are most clearly aligned with Republicans, but don't want to necessarily, identify that way one way or the other. Or they're libertarians, and I think I've got a good libertarian streak from time to time, but that say I don't want to sign up with that party. The compromise position in order to get this done, and it's been tried before and unsuccessfully, may very well be to allow independents to vote, but certainly not Democrats.
And the other thing is, let's say, I was talking to my friend in Lowndes County over here. It's a Democratic county. To get elected, you got to run as a Democrat.
Sure.
But they may not necessarily be liberal or whatever. In any other county, they may be a Republican. So a lot of Republicans then go and vote in the Democratic primary because they care about who the sheriff is. Mm-hmm. So wouldn't that also create some problems on the local level in some of these rural counties?
It certainly could, and those are questions that we're going to need to talk about and vet and kind of flesh out. But I would say this: it may also encourage in some of those counties a Republican to run, where previously the Republican has said, well, there's no chance. Maybe I don't stand a chance in running, but if you know there's a core group of people there, then you might be surprised by what can happen, especially if you allow some independents to play one way or the other.
Well, we're out of time. I appreciate you coming on. We'll see you down in your district in Point Clear this weekend, right?
That's right.
Okay. Well, thanks again. We'll be right back.
You're watching Alabama Public Television.
Next, I'm joined by Robin Stone, Interim Executive Director of the Business Council of Alabama. Robin, thanks for coming on Capitol Journal.
Thanks, Todd. I'm a big fan of the show, and I'm honored to be here.
Well, we're honored to have you here. I know that most of our viewers probably know BCA very well, but some may not. Can you kind of walk us through what the organization does here in the state?
Happily. Business Council of Alabama is 37 years old this year. We've been around for a long time as the leading voice of the business community and advocating issues that impact employers to the legislature and the state's congressional delegation. We work all kinds of issues that impact employers and their decision making in their processes as employers, and work very hard to identify issues that are preeminent among those employers, both large employers and small.
And you yourself have worked in government and politics for many years, held many different positions. Walk me through your career arc.
Well, that may take a while, but I'll be glad to do put a little bit of a synopsis on it. I started as a journalist, very much like you have. I worked in the manufacturing part of the business and steel plant business for 4 or 5 years, and then moved on and worked for the Boeing Company for 20 years in Washington, D.C. and Seattle and places like that. I was honored to work for Governor Riley in his cabinet for a couple of years. And then I served for 15 years at Blue Cross Blue Shield of Alabama. And now I'm with Business Council, working in interim position there as their Chief Executive Officer and CEO.
Well, this weekend is the big Governmental Affairs Conference. Yeah. Happens every year. This is where pretty much all of the state's political leadership gather there in Point Clear for a series of meetings. Maybe the biggest gathering of political leadership outside of maybe State of the State or something. So it's probably the biggest. How is this year's conference shaping up?
Well, you're exactly right. This is the preeminent political and public affairs conference in the state of Alabama. It's roughly 30 some odd years old. I know because I've been to all of them, and they're all different. They're all very exciting. It gives businessmen and women the opportunity to all come together to meet with public officials and policymakers to renew relationships and talk about new ideas and new thoughts about what's the best thing for Alabama. This year is the largest conference we'll ever had. Last year was the record setter, but this year we're going to top 600 people. So if you're interested in policy or politics and things that help employers and ideas to carry forward to public decision makers, Point Clear is the place to be. It's going to be ground zero for politics beginning Friday afternoon.
Yeah, and I saw the rundown of speakers and different breakout sessions and things. It looks really substantive. And I know on Friday there's also the series of policy meetings. These are for BCA members. So is this kind of where member businesses can have a seat at the table and have a say in what y'all's legislative agenda is going to be?
That's exactly right. BCA is a membership-driven organization, always has been and always will be. And we have a series of technical committees and things ranging from environmental to tax to employee benefits to all kind of a myriad of other issues that impact employers in all their areas. And we gather, this is kind of kicks off our policy making process, where this particular conference will have some speakers there to talk about preeminent issues in those areas, and then we'll take those and build with those issues through the fall, and we'll culminate with a policy booklet on federal and state issues that will be delivered and reviewed by our board in late November.
And so that's what ends up being kind of part of your agenda in the legislative session next year?
That's right. That's exactly right. Years ago, we started trying to develop broad range policy positions so we didn't have to go back to our board with specific issues on every piece of legislation. And so where we are now is we've got broad range policy positions that lets us act swiftly and stay within our guidelines as we're advocating to the legislature.
I see. Well, these days, really on both sides of the aisle, you've got this, politicians and pundits alike kind of going after big business, right? There's a lot of this populism sort of coming out. And their complaint being that, big business has too much control of the political system. So as a business organization, how do you respond to this kind of wave of populism that's sprung up lately?
Well, the business community takes a lot of responsibility in all the communities. When a company comes in, and Alabama is so fortunate that we've got so many marquee companies who have been here, Mercedes and Honda and Boeing and Austal and all these people who are scattered throughout the state, and they came here because they loved the business climate and because they had a great labor force and because they thought they could be productive, and they have. They've all been productive. A company will come to Alabama maybe for incentives and things like that, but they're going to grow and they're going to prosper because of the business climate that they have. And I think that when a company comes in, they make a commitment to the state and also to the communities where they operate. And I understand the ideas of civil liberties and issues like that, and we certainly do too, that we want to honor and respect all the civil liberties. But employers have rights and employers have responsibilities too, and that's where we come in, is to try to talk to the legislature and other policymakers to tell them that the business community needs to be heard on these issues that may seem to be more populist kind of issues, but also have an impact to the business community and the people who create and retain jobs.
Of course, BCA is involved politically, not just here in the State House, but on the campaign trail. We've just got out of this primary election where you guys were pretty successful with your slate of candidates. And at the very top was Katie Britt, who,
Absolutely.
I mean, it was her leaving BCA that they got you to become interim chairman, or interim executive director. So my take on this, and I was going down the list of candidates that won, starting with the Senate, the governor. There's just a lot of mainstream Republican candidates. You might say business type Republican candidates, as opposed to the populist, more right-wing candidates in the Republican primary, which almost seem to defy odds, because that doesn't seem like where the political winds are shifting these days. Did that surprise you? Did it encourage you?
We were very encouraged. BCA was very successful in our election efforts. We elected 93% of the candidates that were endorsed. We have a very extensive endorsement process that goes through our membership. They interview candidates. They ask them very straightforward questions about how they feel about issues that impact employers. And that's the thing about BCA. You're never going to see us get involved in things that are kind of fringe issues. We're always going to be talking to people about issues that impact employers and the decisions that employers have to make on a day-by-day basis, be they large companies or be they small companies. But we were very encouraged at the outcome of the elections. All candidates, whoever they are, they're all run on a pro-business platform, but then they have to go and then they have to govern. And that's where we come in to try and give them our perspective about what the impact of each piece of legislation is going to be.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm curious what it might have been like inside of the organization to see Katie Britt, go from resigning as CEO to winning the Republican primary in less than a year.
Well, first of all, the Business Council and all of our employees and all of our members are extremely proud of Katie and the accomplishment. Nobody works harder. Nobody put in more effort than Katie on the campaign trail, and it showed up in the polls with the tremendous vote that she got. She's got a lot of energy. She understands the business community. She understands what creates and promotes jobs and economic opportunities, and she's going to be a great addition to an Alabama delegation that works very closely together on economic issues. I think she's going to do very well, and we're very proud of her.
Switching gears real quick, last week we saw the launch of the Alliance of Alabama Healthcare Consumers. This is, BCA is a member, one of the founding members of this organization. And I wrote about it a little. It said the idea was to promote quality, affordable healthcare options for individuals, families, and consumers and employers. Employers, as you mentioned. How will this group advocate for that?
Well, quality, affordable health care is a very lofty goal and something that we all need to strive for, because health care is a huge driver of the economy. Everybody needs quality health care, and more importantly, everybody deserves quality health care. And I think this coalition of business, organization, and businesses is going to be unique, because these are organizations that provide health care benefits to employers. The largest amount of health care available in the state comes through someone's employees, be they they the state of Alabama or be they a private enterprise. And I think that through education to the legislature and other decision makers about what the impact of these decisions on healthcare is going to be, it's going to make them take some pause and sort of evaluate what's the cost, what's the benefit, can we afford it, is it the right kind of care at the right time?
Well, whenever this topic comes up, the natural question comes to Medicaid expansion, right? Whether the state should take another look, 10, 12 years later at Medicaid expansion. Is that part of this conversation? Is it too early to say, or are there some other more creative ways to close this healthcare gap?
I think it's probably too early to say on the specific question of do you or do you not expand Medicaid. I think what the goal has got to be continually looking at where are the gaps in health care coverage. Everybody in every zip code in Alabama deserves quality health care, be it through Medicare, Medicaid, private employer funded care, but everybody deserves to have that care, and that should be the goal of everybody. And then it gets down to cost and sustainability and availability. We also have an issue on rural health care where people can get health care but they can't get to that care. So that's another big issue that we've got to face. But I don't think this group is going to necessarily say we're going to be for Medicaid expansion right now. I think it's going to be an evaluation to the impact on employers.
Well, you mentioned rural, and that comes to telemedicine. I know that was mentioned in some of the materials. Do you think the state can expand its focus on telemedicine?
Telemedicine has been available in Alabama for about the last 7 or 8 years, and our large insurance companies reimburse employers at the same rate that if you're going into their office. So it's available, and it's got to be pushed, and it's got to be made more available, and more importantly, people have got to be comfortable with that. In the COVID crisis, we saw people utilizing telemedicine more and more and more, and so the question is going to be, is that trend going to continue? Are people going to be comfortable getting that care at home, or are they going to want to go back to their doctor's office? But you want to have that option no matter where you are, particularly, as you said, in the rural areas.
Well, it looks like healthcare might be a big issue to watch in this upcoming next term of the legislature.
Absolutely. Healthcare is always front and center of any legislative session because the legislature, and rightly so, they feel compelled to want to help their constituents on particular areas. This alliance is going to work closely with providers. We're going to examine all the issues and sit down and talk to providers and legislators to talk to them about the fiscal impact of health care and what that means to their constituents on a day-in, basis, and also what the premiums are. People have to pay premiums. Health care is not free. Providers have to be paid. Other vendors have to be paid. And it's a huge driver, as I said, in the economy of the state of Alabama. So there's a lot of discussion ahead of us, and we feel like employers, because they do fund so much health care in Alabama, they deserve a voice to be at the table and to have the opportunity to be in that discussion with policymakers.
Well, something to watch going forward. Robin, thanks again for coming on Capitol Journal.
Thank you very much. I enjoyed it. Thanks.
It's been a pleasure. We'll be right back.
You can watch past episodes of Capitol Journal online anytime at Alabama Public Television's website, aptv.org. Click on the Online Video tab on the main page. You can also connect with Capitol Journal and link to past episodes on Capitol Journal's Facebook page.
Earlier this year, a new trade association called Flex was founded for companies in the gig economy, companies like DoorDash, Grubhub, Uber, and Alabama-based Shipt. I'm pleased to be joined now by Flex CEO Kristin Sharp and Chairman of the Board Steve Benjamin, who are visiting Alabama this week. Welcome to Capitol Journal.
Thanks so much.
Thanks for having us.
Well, tell me more about Flex. Why did you form this association, and what are your goals?
Yeah, thanks very much. So Flex is a new trade association that was recently launched this spring, and it's bringing together, as you mentioned, the leaders in the app-based economy and platform-based economy. Our focus is to start thinking about the ways in which our industry is contributing across the board to the economy. Everything from being more efficient in terms of goods and services, more efficient in terms of mobility, and providing new opportunities for workers who want to be entrepreneurial, self-motivated, and able to sort of decide when, where, and how they work. We're excited in both the short and medium term to start working with lawmakers across the board to think about the ways that kind of creativity, innovation, and entrepreneurialism is providing new opportunities for communities.
Well, you're there at Ship Tower in downtown Birmingham. A lot of folks here in Alabama were excited to see a company like Ship stay in Alabama, rather than move to Silicon Valley or somewhere else. So tell me more about Ship's role in that trade association.
Well, certainly. I mean, obviously, one of the 8 founding members with a whole bunch of other household names that we know, to be able to have Silicon Valley tech ability right here in the heart of the American South. I'm a Southerner, so you get this technical skill along with some Southern hospitality. You got something special going on here. A good, smart, pro-business environment that works to help us push legislation like some of the good stuff passed in the Alabama legislature, and try and spread that environment across the country. The reality is that there are 52 million Americans now who are working on these platforms, who decide they want to take control of their financial independence, their economic freedom, become their own entrepreneurs, and be able to balance work and life in a way that works for them. Understanding, obviously, we're all shaken by the economic impact of the pandemic, and people now really wanting to make sure that they take a bit more control. And we're seeing amazing support and numbers, and now just trying to give a unified voice to protecting the ability for independent work, which I think is sacrosanct to the American way of life.
Yeah, you mentioned the pandemic, and I think maybe a lot of Americans, a lot of Alabamians, maybe got introduced to some gig companies by way of the pandemic. I'm thinking about DoorDash and the addiction I got to DoorDash and other things like that. So now that we're sort of seeing the pandemic wane a little bit or getting back to normal, how does that affect those gig companies that maybe had a huge surge during the pandemic?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we did see a huge surge in the pandemic, both in terms of consumer uptake and wanting deliveries, and also in terms of people who were turning to the gig economy as a way to continue earning income when lots of other things slowed down. We talked to a Ship shopper today who had been working as a bartender before the pandemic, and it was a family-owned restaurant that just closed for a year, and she didn't have a source of income, and creating relationships with some of the people who needed grocery deliveries in the pandemic was a huge source of both enthusiasm and pride and income for her throughout the pandemic. I think as we go forward, what we're seeing is those same consumers who got used to sort of accessing their groceries and food and mobility in different ways in the pandemic are continuing to be excited about that. And we're seeing more and more, I think, a recognition that that's a real positive for our economy, and both a way for people to supplement their income and have more control of it, and also a way for small businesses, family-owned grocery stores, small restaurants to get, to access a broader set of buyers. So that's really exciting.
I know one thing we've been covering here in Alabama, and it's really a nationwide trend, is some businesses having trouble finding workers. I know that the gig economy may be unique to that, but has this sort of workforce shortage and maybe shifting sands in the workforce, has that affected gig companies just like it has other small businesses?
Honestly, in some ways, it's been the opposite for us. We see a lot of people voting with their feet. As you mentioned, there are plenty of traditional jobs out there that are set up where you have a shift and you work, someplace for a set number of hours and set rate of pay. And instead, we're seeing people opt into the flexibility that they get in a different way of working. And we're seeing people actually, we're seeing more people than we had pre-pandemic wanting to try that out.
Yeah. And that's it. And that's maybe at the core of why we spend so much time on the ground in states, in Washington, and even in cities, recognizing that the future work, the flexibility work is here to stay post pandemic for sure, and making sure that people have, again, the flexibility and independence to live lives that help them earn a really good living. Some people making a great living, but being able to do it on their own terms. And we expect we'll continue to see great companies like SHIP continue to grow and succeed.
Again, you're a national group based in D.C., do a lot of work at the national level, but you're here in Alabama, and I'm curious if there's anything you've learned from this trip that you might bring back to policymakers in D.C. To showcase about gig work here in Alabama.
Let me say this first. So I live in Columbia, South Carolina. I'm a Southerner. So it's so interesting and I dare say even really refreshing to have such a significant corporate citizen that is a leader in tech, but also based in the South. There's something unique about that. So you get the good mix of this ideation and innovation, a wonderful corporate culture here, against the backdrop of some good pro-business policymaking, and that turns into just a really good ecosystem that we've been able to watch literally across the headquarters here today. So kind of listening and learning, and hope we can take some of these best practices here that are, helping not only create jobs and support $348 billion industry dollars generated by the app-based economy right now, but also really reaching into communities and helping solve some real challenges. I'm a former elected official, worked for years to try and get grocery stores in some areas that would never have brick and mortar, and now you have companies like SHIP leading the way on addressing the issue of food deserts by connecting people with fresh food in their communities. There's a lot of good stuff happening here. So we're going to take some great ideas from Alabama back to the rest of the country.
Yeah, and I'd say also the thing that I've observed in being here for the last couple of days is what a leader and participant in the community that Shift is. A lot of tech companies are based in parts of the country where there are lots and lots of tech companies, and to be a leader to be the leader of a company in a mid-sized city where you're really closely tied with sort of creating new opportunities in the tech industry for workers. You're creating new sort of connections among the community, as Mayor Benjamin was saying, on food deserts. You're thinking about in an innovative way how to participate in the community. I think that's something that a lot of other cities across the country are going to want to be involved in and learn about. So,
yeah, I'll say this. The legislature passed the alcoholic beverage delivery bill this past legislative session, or I guess the one before it actually, but it was known as the SHIP bill, and I think everybody would agree that that SHIP having a presence in Birmingham or being based in Birmingham was a big deal, and it probably helped that bill along significantly rather than just be a national company, kind of coming in and all that. And so I agree with you that made a difference. Well, while I've still got you for a few minutes here, let me ask you, gig companies, these apps have really changed our behavior in many ways, and some of our tasks, like shopping, like getting around, like ordering food, have just changed significantly. Let me ask you, what is the next thing we may not be thinking about right now that maybe a startup gig company might take a menial task and change it completely with the use of technology? Is there anything out there on the horizon that you think might be the next big thing?
That's a great question.
I'm not sure I can speak to that, but I can suggest that if that company emerges here in Alabama, it will be because of the ecosystem that SHIP has helped create here. Ms. Kristin was talking about the pipeline of talent and technologists here. I mean, the just kind of the youth and vigor here in this building. I can't say what it will be, but my guess is that, again, given the culture here, hardworking, pro-business folks, complemented by a significant technology concern that's participating in this new economy, flexible work in a meaningful way. There's no doubt that if it happens here, it's going to be because of SHIP.
Well, I guess we'll just keep watching Shark Tank to see what the next big thing might be. Well, listen, thanks so much for taking the time to join us on Capitol Journal, and I hope you enjoyed your visit to Alabama.
All right, thank you so much.
Birmingham native Erskine Hawkins was a prominent African-American trumpeter, bandleader, and composer during the big band era of the 1930s and 40s. His Erskine Hawkins Orchestra was a popular dance band in New York City, and with it he recorded the hit Tuxedo Junction, about a streetcar intersection on the Ensley-Fairfield line that was a center of nightlife for African Americans. Hawkins is a member of the Alabama Music and the Alabama Jazz Halls of Fame.
That's our show for tonight. Thanks for watching. We'll be back next Friday night at 7:30 right here on Alabama Public Television. For our Capitol Journal team, I'm Todd Stacy. We'll see you next time.